Let's talk about some of the vessels, some of the blood supply. So we've talked about the organs, we've talked about the accessory organs, we've talked about the tract. Let's talk about the blood supply and the venous drainage of the various organs. So starting with the main branches from the aorta, right? We know the aorta is the major vessel that moves down the thorax, crosses into the abdomen by piercing the diaphragm. And then as soon as it passes into the abdomen, it gives off these three major branches, the celiac trunk being the first one. This is at the vertebral level L1. The superior mesenteric is the second branch. That's going to be a little bit lower. And then the inferior mesenteric is the third branch. And so these three arteries are going to supply the foregut structures. And because I'm an embryology geek, I know the divisions here come from the embryologic development, but the foregut structures, superior mesenteric is the midgut structures, and the inferior mesenteric is the hindgut, or the third part of the GI tract. So embryologically, the GI is divided into these three major chunks, and we'll talk about each of the organs that these arteries supply. So we have the celiac trunk first. And so the celiac trunk is the first major artery. It's going to give off several initial branches, the splenic artery being the first one. And the splenic is this windy or bendy or tortuous artery that runs behind the stomach and goes and supplies the spleen, right? So as the name would imply here, the splenic artery mainly supplies the spleen. The left gastric artery, again, the name in this tells us that it's going to supply gastric, right, stomach. So this is a smaller branch that goes and supplies parts of the stomach, mainly the fundus, but also parts of the esophagus, because it's really so close to the beginning of the stomach as well. And then the third major branch is going to go off on the opposite side, and that is going to be the common hepatic artery. And that is going to branch into two other major branches. But as the name implies, this is going to mainly supply the liver, right? That hepatic. But it's also going to give off the right gastric artery, which is this smaller branch here. And that is also going to help supply the stomach. So left gastric is going to meet with right gastric, and they're both going to help supply that lesser curvature of the stomach. The second major branch coming from the common hepatic is the gastroduodenal. So this really tiny branch that runs down behind the duodenum. And again, the name is really going to help you out here. Gastroduodenal, it's going to help supply part of the stomach, the pylorus, but then part of the duodenum as well. And so that gastroduodenal means it's doing that dual supply. The hepatic arteries, right, are also going to continue to branch. So they're going to mainly supply the liver. They're going to divide further into right and left hepatic and supply the right and left lobes respectively. And so this is basically covering all of the organs of the foregut, all of the major organs of the first part of the GI, which are the stomach, the spleen, the pancreas, the duodenum, and then the liver. Those are all supplied by branches of the celiac trunk. The second major branch, or the midgut branch, is the superior mesenteric artery. This comes off around the level of the pancreas. And so the pancreas is really going to kind of get shared supply from both of these. It's going to supply the pancreas, the small intestine, that is the rest of duodenum. So duodenum is also shared. But then small intestine, large intestine as well. It is going to give off the arcades. So the arcades are basically these small distal branches that are supplying this kind of network, right? Well, it's not a single vessel, but it's really this branching meshwork that is basically the distal part of the vasa recta, okay? And these are supplying all parts of the small intestine. These are going to give off several different branches that are named according to the area that they supply. The jejunal arteries supply the jejunum, the ileal arteries supply the ileum, the colic arteries supply the colon, all right? And then we even have like the sigmoidal artery supplying the sigmoidal as well. So the different branches that are coming off will be named according to the area that they supply. And the ones specifically to the superior mesenteric are the jejunal branches and the ileal branches as well. If we look at the inferior mesenteric, this is going to be the last portion. This is basically the ending part of the transverse colon. So the really end part of the transverse colon, the descending colon, sigmoid colon, and then rectum. So the very distal or last part of the GI tract is what will be supplied by the inferior mesenteric artery. And then that will also give off other branches that you don't really need to know the names, but will be named according to where they are supplying. So the sigmoidal arteries for the sigmoid colon, the rectal arteries for the rectum, et cetera, et cetera. All right, let's speak about the venous drainage. So the main venous drainage will be the inferior vena cava for the systemic drainage. We really want to divide the systemic drainage from the gastrointestinal drainage, because as we said earlier, and as you'll talk about in the lecture part of the class, the portal vein helps for all of that gastrointestinal drainage to go to the liver. So it does not go directly into the inferior vena cava, okay? So the structures that are drained by the inferior vena cava will be the muscles of the abdominal wall, all right? So the posterior abdominal muscles that we talked about, parts of the kidneys, because they are not intraperitoneal organs, they are not gastrointestinal organs. Parts of the pelvis will be drained into the inferior vena cava. And then the femoral vein, which drains the entire lower extremity, will also drain directly into the inferior vena cava by way of the common iliac vein. The portal system. So this is the separate venous drainage that has to be funneled through to the liver. And all of the organs that are being drained into the portal system are the organs that absorb the gastrointestinal, along the gastrointestinal tract. So the organs that absorb the digested material that pass through the GI tract. So the stomach, the spleen, all right, and the spleen, I say spleen here with reservation because the spleen is not really a GI organ, as I said before, but it does still drain into the portal circulation. The duodenum, jejunum, ileum, the colon, so basically ascending, transverse, descending, sigmoid, all of that blood that absorbs the nutrients that comes through the foods that we eat will be sent to the liver by way of the portal vein. The major tributaries or the major veins that help to merge to form the portal vein are the splenic vein, all right? And then we have the superior mesenteric vein, and then the inferior mesenteric vein. So the inferior mesenteric vein typically joins with the splenic first, and then the splenic and superior mesenteric together become the portal vein. So the portal vein does not initially join the inferior vena cava, right? Remember, it has to go through the liver first, and then after all of that processing of all the nutrients, the fats, the carbs, the proteins, after all of that gets processed, packaged, transported, then the rest of that blood will make its way to the inferior vena cava and then back to the right side of the heart. So really important to think about how the portal circulation helps with the processing of the nutrients that comes in and is absorbed from the foods that we ingest. So here's a different view of that portal circulation. Right here's the major portal vein. Notice that it is being formed by superior vena cava and splenic vein. And then we have the inferior mesenteric vein also dumping into the splenic vein. And so all of that blood draining the various organs that we discussed here will be funneled into the liver. Okay, just some different views and different images here of the portal vein. You notice it has to cross the abdomen, so to speak. And we really have to retract the stomach, retract the pancreas, retract parts of the jejunum and ileum to be able to see what's happening with the vasculature, because it's closer to the back or posterior part of the abdominal wall. And same thing is here. And if you think about these three structures, so the common bile duct, the common hepatic artery, and the portal vein, these three structures are typically grouped together and referred to as the portal triad. These three important portal structures that are crossing there and making their way into the liver. will commonly be referred